Hello and welcome to today's review of what high growth firms are doing differently. My name is Megan Wood. I head up product marketing for the APAC business of Intuit, and I'm delighted to be your host for today's session. Now, before we get started, let me take you through some housekeeping. Today's event is being recorded, so we'll be providing everyone who has registered for today's event with a copy via email. So watch out for your email in your inbox so that you can re-review any of the content that we cover today or share that with other members of your team. We're also going to be sending you a copy of the 2025 Growth and Marketing Maturity Benchmarking Report, so you'll be able to review that in detail as well. Now, because we have so many people on the call today, we will be putting you all on mute. However, if you do happen to have any technical difficulties with not being able to see or hear the presentation, we suggest restarting your device, refreshing your browser, or trying a different device. Again, you will be receiving a recording of the session, so while it might not be as good as the live thing, there's no need to panic. You're not going to miss out on any information. If you are having difficulties as well, you can also hit the help icon, the one with the question mark, at the bottom of your screen to launch our troubleshooting guide, which has answers to other frequently asked questions about any issues you might be having. Now, when it comes to asking questions today, certainly feel free to ask away. We are using Slido to manage Q&A today, so you need to head to slido.com and pop in the code. So we can see here that's 2081297, or alternatively you can scan the QR code on the right there and it'll also take you to the right location to ask your questions. Okay, so now that we have our housekeeping out of the way, let's get into today's session. So as you heard earlier, my name is Megan Wood. I head up product marketing for Asia Pacific. I've just clicked over 12 years with Intuit and have been in the accounting and fintech space for many, many years. Prior to that, I worked in 6 accounting firms, ranging from 12 to 1,200 employees. Now, joining me today is Monique Parker. Monique is an award-winning marketer and founder of Accountancy, which is a specialist agency that helps accountants and bookkeepers unlock their X factor through easy marketing strategies and growth. Monique recently helped scale one of Australasia's first advisory networks from $0 to 40 million across 60 firms, and is very passionate about helping firms harness the power of AI and technology to unlock more time, but also to generate fee uplift within the firm. So welcome, Monique. It is great to have you on today's call.
Thank you, Megan, and it is wonderful to be here. Looking forward to diving into these insights together.
Fantastic. Well, let's have a look at our agenda and what we're going to be covering. So firstly, I'm going to provide a little bit of context around the benchmarking report so that you can all get a feel for what it contains and who contributed to it. We'll then dig into each section of the report to discuss the outputs, especially those that stand out as being unusual or favouring a particular segment. The sections include how firms feel about their growth outlook, how they operate with existing and new clients, and the role tech and IT is playing in firms today. We'll close out with some suggestions on what you might like to implement in your firm, depending on where you're at with your growth strategies at the moment. So let's start here. So the 2025 Growth and Marketing Maturity Benchmarking Report was designed to provide accounting firms with a clear view of how their industry peers are approaching growth, how they're approaching marketing, as well as client acquisition in 2025. The Agile Market Intelligence Group surveyed 460 accounting professionals between the 2nd of September and the 13th of October in 2025 to benchmark the marketing and growth maturity across the industry. Now, the report examines some key areas like strategic planning, positioning, referral systems, digital marketing, technology adoption, as well as how they spend time with clients. Now, the goal of the report was to establish a bit of a baseline that allows firms to assess where they stand relative to their industry peers, and also to identify potentially what current stage of maturity your firm might be at in relation to marketing and growth. Now, the insights in the report are intended to serve as a bit of a roadmap. So whether your firm is currently looking to refine your messaging, or maybe you're looking at building a structured referral process, maybe you're looking to strengthen your digital presence, or you're evaluating new technology to use in 2026. This research aims to give you some clear guidance and data-backed information on where to focus your efforts next. Now, when we look at the breakdown of who contributed to the 2025 Growth and Marketing Maturity Benchmarking Report, you can see that out of the 460 firms who provided their input, the vast majority, so we're looking at 92%, were accounting firms and 8% were bookkeeping firms. It's also important to note that the input for the report has come from senior leadership. So we can see here that 79% of respondents were senior managers or above, which in some respects validates the content and the insights in the report. And when it comes to the size of the firms who contributed, you can see here the majority have 19 employees or fewer, which kind of reflects the Australian accounting industry as a whole. The majority of firms in Australia have 19 or fewer employees. Now I'm going to cut to the chase and I'm going to call out the key findings of the report, some of which Monique and I are going to be discussing in more detail. So the first one it relates to 10% of firms are looking to achieve significant expansion or growth in their client base in the first 12 months. Next, we saw 60% of firms are strategic advisors for their clients. Now, I'm not sure that this particular statistic surprised me. I might have even thought it might have been a bit low, to be honest, but it's a good benchmark or a starting place. At least we've got a number now. So 60% are strategic advisors. We also learned that high growth firms, and we'll look at how each segment has been defined shortly, these firms are 3 times more effective when it comes to acquiring new clients online. So keen to dig into that one and how they do that. We also learned high growth firms more actively ask for referrals from their existing clients and have systems in place to help them ask for these referrals on an ongoing, on-demand basis. Maybe not a surprise here either, but high growth firms see the importance of marketing so that they have their highest adoption of marketing tactics and also use more marketing channels to win new clients than their peers. We know that Australian accounting firms rely heavily on their tech to get work done. And interestingly, 61% say they leverage their tech stack to have a competitive advantage over their peers. So we'll be looking at that one as well. And lastly, what's a webinar without AI? 83% of accountants say that they have that they're using AI or have been exposed to AI, with 28% of high growth firms using AI daily and for over an hour. So I'm really looking forward to digging deeper into that learning as well. So that's a glimpse of the key findings of the report. So we're now going to go through each section of the report and call out what we found was informative or interesting. So start with the growth outlook. So this section looked at the current growth outlook of Australian firms and identified their barriers to growth. So when we look at what firms said about their growth outlook for the next 12 months, and this is all about expanding their client base, we can see that 10% of firms said that they plan to significantly increase their client base through growth and acquisition tactics. The vast majority, so 61%, still have a growth outlook, but expect it to be more moderate. So in the report, they're referenced as moderate growth group or the growth outlook group. And 29% of those that were surveyed have a conservative outlook and will likely stay the same or relatively consistent with their existing client base size. So it's worth noting here as we dig into the report, this is how the segments have been defined. So high growth, growth, and conservative. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the findings. So I think this is an interesting one. So the report states that capacity constraints, so not having enough time or not having enough people, is the largest barrier for 70% of all firms. And I feel like this has probably been quite a consistent restraint over time. However, the barrier was reported least for high growth firms. So part of me thinks, oh, that might be because they've got more staff. Maybe they don't. I don't know. So Monique, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here to guide everyone from your experience. So what operational or strategic decisions are high growth firms making that allow them to feel less capacity constrained? And of that, is there something that our moderate or our growth and conservative firms can adopt to help them feel less constrained when it comes to time and people?
Yes, well, that's such a great question because on the surface, you might actually think that it would be the opposite, right? That the firms that are planning to grow are experiencing less capacity constraints. But typically, what we're finding across the board with all of the firms that I work with is they're all experiencing similar capacity constraints, but it's the how they're approaching it that's defining whether they are able to strategically plan for growth. So there's a couple of things that are happening with firms that have a high growth outlook is that they're being incredibly proactive when it comes to their talent and their team capacity. And what that looks like in practical terms is they're actually mapping out their talent pipeline. They're mapping out org chart requirements inside their firm, and they're working often with recruiters in advance of when they actually need those team or it's too late, so to speak. So they're actually being really proactive and sometimes engaging slightly in advance. The other thing is that they're often a more desirable firm in terms of outwardly facing in the market for candidates to come and work at. So all firms are competing for talent. There is literally not enough onshore talent to fill the roles. So it is very competitive. And high growth firms, which we'll get into no doubt a little bit later, are typically more proactive across the board. And some of the actual marketing that they do is not just for client acquisition, it's actually really intentionally around attracting candidates. So there's the one side that they are very intentional around how they are going to create capacity as opposed to just reacting when a team leaves or the workload's too high. Then on the other side, which we'll also dive into, like you said, there's no report without AI. They are experimenting and looking at avenues to streamline efficiencies and create capacity through those channels, both AI and then more traditional approaches like having offshore teams support their onshore team. So it's really interesting, and I think that it's all about perspective and being strategic. And some of the smaller firms typically face ongoing capacity constraints because they are underpricing, don't have enough margins, and then literally can't afford to compete with the onshore salaries in the market. So it's a real catch-22. It's a tricky one, but firms that have committed to thrive are typically taking proactive approaches across the board.
Yeah, I love that. So it's not necessarily related to size. It can actually be around like forecasting, having a really clear understanding of the throughput of the firm, and then making sure that you've got the right amount, but also probably the right talent to be able to get that work done. So uh, some
Correct.
great takeaways there, I think, already. That's the first question I've asked you, so that's amazing. Uh, Now, I also called out here in the report, there was a noticeable difference between um, high growth firms were calling out that their marketing capability had a bit of a gap, and they were calling that out as a barrier, as compared to our growth and conservative firms. And so my immediate thought there was, well, these high growth firms I would have thought would have um, marketers. They would actually employ marketers, but maybe that's not the case. So, given that high growth firms are generally more diversified in their marketing efforts, so they use more marketing channels, why do you think they feel that there's a gap um, different than the growth and conservative segments?
Yes, and again, this is a really interesting stat because it's contrary to what you might think.
Yeah.
What we're seeing across firms of all categories is typically none of them are doing marketing particularly well, and the firms that don't have a high growth outlook are actually doing usually almost no marketing, and therefore they haven't really self-identified that they have a capability gap because they're not endeavoring to execute or undertake it. Whereas the firms in high growth mode have typically identified they have a capability gap, and there's usually a whole lot of frustration that surrounds that because some of them have tried to employ in-house marketers, but promoting an accounting firm is a very specialist skill that typically is not just a young junior coming in to do a bit of social media and things like that. It's actually a bit more nuanced. So, and I hear all the time from firms frustrated with trying to engage agencies and all sorts. And typically it actually comes down to a lack of understanding of how the fundamentals of a marketing growth engine works, which is very different to tactics, which is like posting a social media post or, any individual thing. It's like, how is this actually underpinning the growth of your firm? And I know we'll be going into some more stats of that soon, which will bring a few things to light, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll keep us going. Good point. Let's move on to look at existing client growth. So this section of the report looked at how accounting firms engage with their current client base, how they go about getting feedback on how the firm is performing with their clients, and also how they're involved or influence their clients' decision making. So, when asked to what extent the firm is involved in their clients' key business decisions, you can see here that 44% are mostly involved or completely involved. Interestingly, a key finding is that 61% of high growth firms say that they're essentially the strategic advisors for their clients. So, another question for you here, Monique, is around how can firms that may currently today be doing or living a more transactional or a compliance relationship actually shift to a more strategic advisory relationship? And are there like one or two tangible actions that firms can do that can demonstrate value and increase their involvement in their clients' key business decisions?
Yes, great question. So, what we find typically with the higher growth firms is that often the advisory or various aspects of advisory and service are often bundled into minimum retainers or minimum service levels to work with the firm. So, it's already baked in, if you will. And then there are a number of other factors, whereas the lower growth firms, typically it's not. It is, like you said, more transactional, and there can be a real struggle to get that level of engagement. So, the first thing is for firms looking to be more involved with a client's key business decisions is a really simple one, but in today's day of technology and all things going on, we often forget about this is actual face time with clients. Now, that could be in person, it could be a virtual meeting, and nothing like a good old-fashioned phone call. Now, this isn't about giving away free advice, so getting in front of your clients and then just giving away free advisory, which is what typically tends to happen in firms that aren't strategic about it, and therefore it doesn't make sense because you're just, not charging for that which you want to grow. But it's about having conversations with your clients where you're just asking key questions, uncovering what's going on, a little bit more of how you would consider a diagnostic, and then a prescription, which is sort of, the services or what needs to happen, as opposed to free coaching, consulting, and advisory. And so firms can do that in many ways, depending on the size and depending on the team available. But really, just by setting up a bit of a framework for a regular cadence or times of year where it makes sense to get in front of your clients if you work backwards on the tax calendar. You need to be having these conversations, certain number of months prior to certain key dates in the year, end of financial year being obviously an easy one, and then scheduling it and diarising it. Now, you can have team doing reach out for you. It doesn't have to be done by the most busy partner or director in the firm. You can also have technology do this for you. So there's amazing automations inside many of the softwares and practice management tools. And there's also ways that you can do this, what I call slightly automated, but you still have to manually trigger it through, for example, CRMs and mailing software platforms, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later. But you can use these as allies. So that's a really easy, tangible first step. And then, secondly, you can use some of your client communications to start showcasing to your own client database what it is that you actually do for some of your other clients. So some of the smaller firms are actually doing really great advisory work and very involved in client businesses, but it's just for a very small segment or handful of clients in their firm. But none of the other clients in the firm know the results that those clients are getting or the amazing ways that the team members of the firm are actually contributing to that client's success. So if you have a newsletter or if you have a regular email cadence to your own client base, it's really easy to start showcasing some wins from your other clients, and talking a little bit about the process that you did with those clients or key questions you asked. So it helps prompt, a bit of a spark of an idea for your other clients that this is actually something you could provide. I hear time and time again from firms that have clients actually leave their practice because the clients weren't even aware that the firm they were with could offer or provide those services, and they were essentially poached by another firm doing a better job of communicating that. So you can just start in a really small way, but don't underestimate the power of people, social proof essentially from within your own client base to help plant seeds of possibility for your other clients. If you are on this webinar and you are old enough to remember the movie When Harry Met Sally, you may remember the scene in the cafe where she saw what was possible and said, "Oh, I want what she's having." Right? And your clients are like that as well. A client in business, mostly they want success and better results, but they don't know that you have access ways to do that. So it's about creating and painting that picture. So
I
those are
love that.
two easy ways to get the ball rolling and get started.
Yeah, I love that, Monique. And if my account is anything to go by, being able to ask discovery questions is something that accountants typically find very easy. And just showcasing your wares. It's just one of those things. If you're doing great work, why wouldn't you make sure the rest of your client base knows that you're doing that great work as well? So makes a lot of sense, and hopefully a couple of little takeaways there already. Now I've got another question for you, and this one. actually relates to a conflicting trend in engagement with high value clients. So, what the report outlines is that high growth firms and conservative outlook firms both outperform the moderate growth segment in regularly engaging with high value clients. So, why do you think it is that moderate or this growth segment is showing the weakest performance in regular engagement with their high value clients, the most important ones, I would beg to suggest?
Yes, and this is really interesting because it's a real trap that happens for firms who are sitting in the middle where they do have genuine both capacity constraints, but often also seniority and actual skill expertise constraints in the firm. So what typically happens is the really small firms, the partner, director, owner is often very engaged with the high value clients, and it's a very relationship driven approach, which is amazing in many ways, but also inherently risky for when they go to sell. And also, it's not scalable and it creates a reliance on that individual in the firm. On the flip side, the higher growth firms usually are quite strategic, like we've already shared, around how they map out and even sell the client packages and retainers, and typically have a little bit more of an ability to train and take team on the journey for mentoring and delivering those services. The ones in the middle are often stuck and are often typically over servicing lower value clients, troublesome clients, needy clients, demanding clients, clients that certainly don't appreciate the value that they are receiving. And then what typically happens is they're often under servicing their highest value clients. And I find it time and time again in firms, and it's a real trap. And the only way often to get around that is to start looking strategically, as I call, releasing back into the wild some of the clients on your client base who are actually getting a really sweet deal from you at the expense of your growth opportunities in your firm, and actually delivering more services and engaging more frequently with the higher value clients. It's like the 80-20 rule that we're all familiar with. And sadly, this applies in a really detrimental way for firms that are in that spot in the middle where it's still then not able to create systems and structures for better serving those high value clients. So it seems like, again, another contrary, really contradictory statistic, but that's how I see it play out on the ground with local firms here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'd be interesting to know for those that are on the call whether they have segmented their client base into, high value firms. I know people will look at, the revenue that they might bring in. That's a component, but whether they've segmented and whether they're actively looking at ensuring that they're servicing the right clients at the right level. So that's another, I guess, another outcome that a CRM, a customer relationship management tool, can help firms keep track of, how they're servicing their customers and making sure they're servicing the right customers at the right level.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to move on and we're going to talk about client feedback. So, this always tends to make people squirm in their seats a little bit, but this is a critical area where high growth firms are differentiating themselves. So, they're twice as likely to have consistent feedback systems in place in comparison to their peers. And so, certainly from my own experience in accounting firms, we had a client interview checklist that included asking for feedback or but honestly, where that conversation typically led to is, how the firm could do more to minimize, tax. So the key takeaway from the report, though, was all around consistency as well as having a system. So it moves the firm from relying on, a checklist and an ad hoc question to having an actionable process that actually enables them to continually improve what they do. So, from your experience, Monique, what is the difference between a consistent feedback system versus simply asking for ad hoc reviews? And how do high growth firms ensure the feedback that they actually collect from their customers is fed into actionable process that leads to improvements and not just like noted on the client file and filed away.
Oh, there are so many questions within the questions there, Megan. I
Sorry
love
about that.
it.
It's a good area to dig into.
Yes. So I guess the first thing you mentioned was the difference between feedback and reviews. And it's one thing to have a system in place, which we'll probably touch on later, around collecting testimonials and reviews for the purpose of promoting your firm. That's different to collecting feedback from customers, which has the purpose around how you can do better, serve better, and up level the caliber of what's happening inside the firm. So let's talk about then feedback. And one of the reasons we shy away from this is because no one really wants to hear bad feedback. And if you don't ask for feedback, you won't typically get the bad feedback. The feedback, though, happens when they leave the firm and go to another accounting firm. So, to help mitigate that, if you have a regular feedback mechanism in place, you will be able to address things early. And sometimes what seems on the surface like bad feedback is actually really that a client needs to be serviced at a higher level, and it's an opportunity to offer and provide that service. But how can you turn it from ad hoc, just when it's top of mind, versus a systemized process? And again, this is where you can leverage technology. So you can automate this process at certain times. So after you've delivered great work or any work, as set bundles, you can have an automated trigger that goes out. So it's evergreen, it's always part of the process. You need to have a mechanism in place to very swiftly respond in a very proactive, empowered way around bad feedback, because that's your best opportunity to make an impact. And then what you'll find is if you have a regular automated mechanism using technology, you can collate and aggregate that feedback. So you can use tools like NPS, which is Net Promoter Score, if you want to KPI internal team members. That's something I've seen needs to be done with a little bit of finesse, but can really help team members to improve that client experience. But you can also aggregate it into themes or areas or priorities. And then, truthfully, the only way that I see feedback being incorporated well or used to uplift fees and service levels in the firm is if somebody is the champion of that function. And typically, if your firm has a practice manager or a business manager or a client service manager, these are great people to own that function. And if there's anything that's a meaningful insight that comes out of it, then obviously it has to be there has to be an internal mechanism for escalating and raising this and bringing it to team meetings so that projects can be initiated or actioned. Otherwise, you just collect a lot of feedback forms and they sit around and maybe one person read it and it did provide some insight, but it hasn't been shared or communicated across the team. And I will add that it has to be done in a way that separates feedback around how we improve our firm from feedback related to specific team members, because this is why often the whole process gets thwarted because it doesn't create a psychologically safe scenario to elicit feedback in the firm. So that's a little bit of, a deep dive topic, but it gives you an insight as to why this is typically a roadblock in firms.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I do think, generally speaking, all firms would love to improve and they would love guidance on the areas they need to improve. So this is a mechanism that helps them to do that safely and achieve the outcome that they're after. So the next section that we're going to look at is new client growth. So in the report, that this particular chapter looked at how accounting firms use their digital presence to win new clients, along with what marketing channels they're actually using and the strategies that they're using also for collecting client referrals. So let's have a look at some numbers here. So when we look at how firms rate their digital presence for attracting new clients, only 9% across the board said that it was very effective or higher. And when you look at how the segments rated their effectiveness, 29% of high growth firms said that their digital presence was extremely effective or very effective. The growth firms called out that theirs was 9%, and the conservative firms came in at 4%. Now, when we look at the marketing channels that firms typically use, this is what they told us. And by the way, isn't a complete list. All I've done here is pull out the top five. But we can see a high percentage of firms use multiple channels, which is fantastic to promote themselves online. Yet, as we saw on the prior slide, only 9% of firms rate their digital presence as very or extremely effective. So, Monique, the report sort of goes on to suggest that the problem with having an effective digital presence isn't really around adoption, but it's more in execution. So, what specific actions or metrics can firms use to move their website and their social media from simply being an online brochure, which unfortunately a couple of firms I worked for, that's pretty much all it was, to being a strategic engine that's designed for sort of client conversion?
Yeah, great question. And again, this is another area that many firms in the industry struggle with or have historically under-invested in, hence the lack of performance. And this is often because they're relying on channels such as referrals and word of mouth. However, if they consider that someone who's received a referral, so their friend has recommended your accounting firm, first thing they still do is jump online, check out your website, check out your social media, and make some assessments for themselves if your firm is the type of firm they might want to work with. And they're also making judgments around where they consider your positioning and level of service offering and how you rank in terms of pricing compared to other firms, because people are still judging a book by its cover. So, the first step you can take is to understand the importance of your digital home, not just from a perspective of client acquisition, but for those of you who are struggling with capacity, candidates also go and online stalk you and check out your website and social media, and they want to get an understanding if your firm has a vibe like it's still operating in 1999, or if you're new and trendy and showcasing your culture. So the first thing is for firms to understand that even if organic channels are one of their most important sources, their online presence is still incredibly important because firms also, majority of them, there's only a small handful that actually measure their online web stats. Most firms have no way of measuring the opportunity cost of lost business from a bad digital presence. So they might say, oh, we're not getting many inquiries online, but there's no way to measure what that could have been and just how significant and substantial that is. And other industries who do really well in this space, so for example, who are adjacent to accountants, so for example, the legal profession, mortgage brokers, they often do really well. So it's not that this isn't an acquisition channel, it's just that it's not done well by the industry. So I'm going to share an example in a moment, but the first thing is to make sure that your website is updated. You've invested in something that's, new and modern. Design aesthetics online change very, very quickly. So even if you had the most amazing website in the world 10 years ago, it still looks like now a 10-year-old website. So it is important to have technology that you can update and maintain, and you're not beholden to the purse strings of a very cagey agency who has you under lock and key. Social media is a really easy one. These days, there are amazing AI tools, digital marketing tools that you can actually use inside your own firm and build your capabilities in-house to start bringing your own voice and culture to life online. The great news is that the benchmark is incredibly low in the industry. So if your firm is willing to play the game and consider your online presence as an investment in the future of your firm, both for better clients and better candidates, not necessarily just about more, but better, you'll find that you'll already be leaps and bounds ahead of other firms. And then if you are a firm who already has some of these things in play, it's about being a bit more strategic around them. For example, what's the client pathway when people land on your website? How are they engaging, receiving value from you, and an easy pathway to booking in for consultations? Most firms don't tick those three boxes, and hence that's also a lost opportunity. I'd also like to call out here email marketing and newsletters at 34%. This is one of the most underrated strategies, in my opinion, having worked with so many firms and the easiest pathway for quick wins. And other industries find that for every dollar invested, and you could consider this time or money, depending on how you're engaging it, has the highest ROI of all marketing spend. So it's something we always help firms with. As Megan mentioned, there's amazing integrations between QuickBooks and MailChimp. And I think most firms will be so surprised about how easy it is to deploy, that it's an easy win.
Oh, fantastic. Well, everyone's looking for an easy win, so that's a great thing.
Yes.
But let us look at the next slide, which we've just looked at, what channels firms are using. Yet interestingly, here we're looking at the most effective, and we can see here that referral programs, which I'm assuming if it's not a systemized process, it's likely word of mouth. And that was ranked number 3 on all of the channels that firms use. But we can see here when we look at the most effective, word of mouth still ranks number 1. So, got to ask the question, Monique, why do firms need all of these marketing channels if the most effective one is simple word of mouth?
Yes. Well, firstly, it's one of the most effective channels because in many cases it's the most prioritized or the only channel that's really being put in play. And I think when you look at the difference in percentage, say for example, between the conservative outlook firms and the high growth firms, most firms that have big growth goals will need to have channels beyond just referrals. And what you'll find is that the more engaging and powerful your marketing channels are, it actually facilitates more referrals because your own clients, you stay top of mind to your own clients, they see you're doing cool things, and there's reasons for them to have conversations or invite in their recommendations. Or you will find that often in firms, clients or new clients are misattributed as referrals when in fact they've come through a variety of other sources. They've seen you at an event, they've seen you online, all sorts of things. But it's a really easy one because most firms are not methodically recording the source of new clients or understanding the pathway of what it took and how many touch points before someone actually made the move to contact their firm. So it's often misunderstood, but suffice to say, it's still an incredibly powerful channel, and most firms actually can still do a better job in this area.
Fantastic. Well, that's an interesting one because we're really talking about attribution there, and to the point you've made that there might be a whole range of touch points that have occurred prior to the client actually becoming a client of the firm. So you can't disregard all of the ways that they may build their confidence in actually becoming a client of the firm. And you've added slide 2, Monique, which I think is pretty interesting. So I think this talks to an accounting firm's website and really how they've probably personalized it to really show their culture.
Yeah, so I thought I'd share this example because this is a young, edgy, very high growth firm based in Brisbane. And this is a snapshot of their website. They sort of doubled their fees and their team over the last, period. And their
Wow.
website says we're not just accountants. And I know that that's become quite common now for firms to use various iterations of that tagline, more than accountants, not just accountants. It's very easy to say. But what your potential clients are looking for is demonstration of that fact. how are you actually different? And that comes through your messaging, it comes through how you provide resources. This firm shows up at events and does amazing curated community get togethers with their client base. The resources that they provide are their style, their vibe, and they're not just cookie cutter, resources that the industry has been using for the last 15 years, 7 ways to improve your cash flow type of vibe. These are really modern looking documents that, again, using the power of AI and technology. Obviously, this is one of my clients, so they've had a bit of, a head start, but been able to implement this and now manage most of what they're doing in-house. So it's just an indication because I know firms just like a little bit of a live demo.
Mm. No, that's great because it definitely looks authentic to me when I look at it, and the consistency of the colors and that whole vibe you talk about is reflected in the website, but also looks like some of those resources they've made available. Okay, let me keep
Absolutely.
you.
And just to
Sorry.
share one thing, their ideal clients are business owners. They have minimum retainers that would put a lot of more established accounting firms to shame. And they have people seeking them out specifically because of their culture and no issues recruiting. So that kind of just sort of encapsulates everything we shared previously.
Yeah, fantastic. No, I love it. Absolutely. Now we're still on referral programs here. So one barrier that the report calls out that I wanted to mention was actually asking for the referral. So firms were saying that they didn't feel they weren't asking for referrals because they were concerned it would make the client feel uncomfortable. So, given that firms want to grow, and we've seen that referrals are the most effective marketing channel, how can firms overcome this concern of making their clients feel uncomfortable when they're asking for a referral?
Well, honestly, Megan, it's a legitimate concern because when it's not done well, it does make clients feel uncomfortable. And it's also really uncomfortable for the accountant or whoever's asking for it. So it's a legitimate concern. And I think that the challenge is if you're only reliant on a conversation and there's no other mechanism in place, and you're just literally saying, who else do you know in business that could, would like our help that you could refer to us? That is kind of awkward. What we see working really well is when your firm has a culture of inviting people into your world. So you've got a great digital presence. If you run some value-added events, so there's some firms we know that run wine and cheese sessions on certain topics. They invite their clients. Their clients are invited to bring a friend or a colleague. So or the same thing can be done in a virtual setting, webinars or really cool value-added things. It's very easy for people to invite, aka refer, their friends into scenarios where their friends are receiving value. Another example is that across the course of a year, at certain promotional periods, maybe a planning service of some description, the firm issues vouchers. These can be digital vouchers. There's all sorts of ways to do it that their clients can give to people they know if they want to come in. And then simple things as well, like in your newsletter, and we've been banging on about the benefits of that, you can incorporate really fun messages and do little campaigns throughout the year. Maybe there's, a fun prize that one of your other clients, if they've got product, donate something for referrals or discounted promotional periods. So, if you've got anyone who benefit from our services, we're actually, giving them $500 off the first, whatever that might be, just for this period for new clients. And obviously, $500 depends on the price of your service, right? Maybe it's only $100. Don't get worried about the details. And your client might also receive a $100 credit off their next bill. So it's like win-win. So if there's reasons for having a conversation in the first place, it makes it easy. And if not, the only way to get past this is really good sales and communication training delivered in your firm and role playing it. Because it's not fair to expect an accountant to be a persuasion and influence master, or even to feel comfortable without something to support them. So I think this has highlighted a very real, and legitimate concern.
Yeah, no, I love that. And there certainly feels like if there is a way of coming up with a line or a question or whatever it is that you're actually comfortable asking, and it doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, and it certainly doesn't make the client feel uncomfortable, just having that available and rehearsed and ready to pull out at any stage, I think would help streamline that process. Okay, I'm going to get into the final section of the report now, Monique. We're going to start talking about technology and AI, which I know you love. And so this particular section in the report talked to how technology and AI are being leveraged by accounting firms for practice growth, how to save time as well as a competitive advantage with their peers. We found that 83% of accountants use AI, and high growth firms are leading the adoption of strategic technologies like workflow automation and data analytics. So let's have a look at this particular graph. Now, this one is just really calling out the technology or the systems firms are saying that they use to run their practices. And you can see that this list excludes systems like client accounting, so QuickBooks Online, tax preparation, like QuickBooks Tax, as they're seen more as client management systems, not actual systems required to run the business. And if we drill in a little bit here, we can see that high growth firms show significantly high adoption of technologies beyond the core accounting stack I just mentioned. They're looking at tools like data analytics, as well as CRM or customer relationship management tools, compared to the growth firms and the conservative firms. So, Monique, high growth firms tell us that they use their technology as a competitive advantage in the industry. So, what sort of edge or what sort of advantage have you found these strategic tools unlocking for these high growth firms?
Yeah, so technology is a real game changer when used well. And it really depends because it's quite contextualized to the firm and how their tech stack is operating together. But most firms, first and foremost, aren't fully taking advantage of the capabilities of the tech stack they have in play. And that's usually the first place that I recommend firms start. And also, for firms to be working together as a team is often the real game changer. So what you might find in firms is that you'll have a couple of people or the people answering the survey who are really interested in AI and really using it. And then it's a bit of an ad hoc approach across the team function. So the ones that are really winning that I see are actually uniting their focus around their tech stack and AI as a team, sharing the learnings, sharing the improvements, creating internal playbooks, doing the same thing in the same way, right? Because what you'll find is someone's figured out a cool extraction scenario, and someone sitting two desks down is still plodding away using a different approach. So it's actually not about what's the AI tool or what's the tech stack. It's about how are you actually leveraging it and also bringing the whole team along for the ride. And that's the hard part, but it certainly creates an advantage. So, for example, there can often be a bit of a learning curve and implementation curve for any new technology. But the faster you can get through that, the faster you get to the other side of efficiencies. And the same is true with AI. So, a really easy competitive advantage that I see many firms rolling out, and it's one of the easiest ones to do because it doesn't need to tie in with all your confidential and client data, is using AI to for strategic growth through using it across your marketing, communications, and client value adding function across your firm. Because this doesn't require the use of all the sensitive data, so it's really easy to implement quickly. And what we're seeing is that firms that are really small and have much smaller budgets and much smaller teams in the market, so what people can see in the world, so what potential clients can see, they are radically outpacing firms with like 100 times the payroll and the team, and even having some in-house BDMs and team members. So It's a huge advantage, particularly I think when it comes to positioning for a better caliber of client. It's not necessarily just about efficiency for some of the very low ticket work behind the scenes, because ultimately the software that people are using are starting to develop those capabilities anyway. But it's about how you position your firm and facilitate the transformational relationship with a client, not just a transactional one.
Yeah, I love that. And probably one thing I would add to that, certainly I found in my experience in training accounting firms, is actually how well they have been trained in a particular tool to get the most out of it. And I'll be the first one to put my hand up saying, oh, I probably know how to use 30% of Excel. But if the team is well trained, that's also an advantage they can have over, others that might have the exact same piece of technology, but not trained as well. Now, I'm going to take you on to AI now, Monique. I know it's one of your passion projects. It certainly, we've seen there that there's a high adoption rate of AI in the accounting profession, which is fantastic. But the top barriers that have been called out that are sort of hampering people's use of AI relate to client data privacy, which you just talked about, like dealing with those, having financial numbers and those sorts of things floating around, as well as a lack of trust in the actual accuracy that is provided. So at Intuit, we actually have to complete a learning module before we can get access to the internal AI tools. And that module definitely talks to data privacy and also appreciating that 100% of what the AI tool spits out may not be correct. So it's very important that you check it. So now leading straight on here, Monique, you have outlined some comms here. I'm assuming have been using AI to develop.
Yes, so this is an example of some of the materials that firms that I work with are rolling out. So this is an example of a regional firm in Queensland in a very small area who have been using AI and marketing technology in combination, obviously with guidance and some templates and resources to roll out client resources, client communications, and market leading material that have really elevated their positioning in the region. It's made them look like one of the top contenders. And what they've actually been able to do is focus on some higher margin work behind the scenes and some efficiencies through speeding up time in these areas. So it's a very easy, quick win. And there's little risk because you're not using client data. And if your firm can't make what I consider quite basic AI applications like this, the norm and easy, then you're going to struggle with some of the really detailed nuances applications. So you can build what I call AI capabilities inside your firm through low risk areas.
Yeah, no, I like this. And that makes sense. That is a great starting point. Why not do something that, again, very low risk, and just, yeah, get familiar with what is possible. And even, being able to use the tools and being able to structure the appropriate prompt to get the best output. So now I love that one. So we've covered a little bit of territory today, Monique, and I'm sure there are firms that are keen to learn a little bit more about what they can do to replicate or take from what high growth firms are doing. So, what would you recommend they need to do to get started?
Yes, I love it. Well, first of all, I recommend that firms consider what growth actually means for them because it's a word that's bandied around a lot by different factions in the industry, and there can be a lot of pressure associated with that term. But to think about what that could look like for your firm, because growth doesn't have to mean more clients necessarily, certainly not low ticket clients. It might mean actually working with less clients, but in a more profitable and enjoyable way. So it's actually to consider what your end game is, what growth looks like, and what success looks like, so that you then can reverse engineer backwards to what steps are going to be the most appropriate and have the biggest impact for the actual destination you're looking to get to. Now, we have some really great recommendations that we've popped together in a checklist format for you based off the results and the data from this report. You can scan the QR code, it will give you immediate access to a downloadable PDF that you can print out. With some really tangible action items that you can implement, hopefully, maybe in the following weeks, because it's a great time to get started. And so I think probably one of the biggest takeaways, that we mentioned early in the call was really having regular touch points and check-ins with your clients and using the technology to help systemize and automate that would be a really big one after you know what your goals are. And that way, because there's no point having a check-in with a client that really shouldn't be on your client roster, right? So it's to reverse engineer that success and then use some of these points to get started.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much, Monique, for sharing your expertise today. It was very insightful and much appreciated. So, we are now at the end of today's What High Growth Firms Do Differently webinar. For those of you on the call, we trust you learned something new and hopefully picked up a few ideas to implement in your practice to make 2026 your best on record. Be sure to access the Growth and Marketing Maturity Benchmark report, which we're going to be sharing with you via email after today's session. It is a really interesting read, and absolutely make sure you check out Monique's action plan for more ideas. So that is it. Again, thank you for attending. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you. See you.